Hi everyone, Bianca Raby here, and today I'm joined by Rachel, a true leader in learning and development. We're going to chat about her journey from the world of education to running her own show and pick up some golden nuggets for those of you looking to transition from being doers to leaders in this field. We'll touch on the nitty-gritty stuff like the importance of processes, setting boundaries, and staying grounded in the work, even as leaders. So if you're eyeing a leadership role in learning and development, this conversation is just for you. So let's dive in. Hi everyone, and hi Rachel. Thank you for joining me today, Rachel. I'll let you introduce yourself. I'm very excited about our conversation. We've had a couple on the side, which has got me a bit of a sense of your career. So yeah, maybe tell the viewers all about yourself a little bit before we dive in.
Absolutely. Yes. Thanks for having me, Bianca. I'm so excited to be here. So I'm Rachel Schell. I am in the States. I live in Arkansas, but I am from Mississippi. And yes, I have this very thick Southern accent. Don't try to closed caption this. They never get it right. It's always funny, the words that come up. And I'm like, that's not what I said. But I am a learning and development leader. I have my own company, RES Personalized Solutions, but as part of that, I also run the Emerging Leaders in L&D group. And we are a professional network that supports learning and development professionals who are wanting to take that leap to leadership. I've been in the learning and development space since 2008. I taught in higher education and then really loved this fancy new tool we were using for online learning called Blackboard. And so
I love that was cool back then.
I know, it was so cool in 2008. I got to go to like one of the first Blackboard trainings that the university offered and learned all about it. And I remember at the time just going, this is going to change how people learn. I knew way back then that it was a game changer. And that was it. That is when I fell in love with learning and development. I wanted to know everything about how I could use this powerful tool to make learning experiences better for my students. The university I was at that time maybe had like 2 or 3 online courses. And so I just went all in on it. And it led me to getting 2 master's degrees and multiple jobs in the learning and development space. And so I've done everything from being a learning specialist, being an instructional designer, all the way up to leading teams and leading initiatives in the state of Arkansas. I worked for the Arkansas Department of Education throughout this journey. Yes, led initiatives in bringing technology into the classroom and more online learning. But yeah, in 2018, I started my own company and took that dive into the corporate world. And that's where I've been ever since, but still supporting L&D leaders who are coming from all different walks of life and helping them figure out how they can do this crazy learning and development work that we do.
And we're going to pick up exactly on that leadership element, but I just want to go back to one thing. Can you remind me, you were a classroom teacher at some point? Did you work?
Yes. I was not a primary classroom teacher. I was a higher education classroom teacher. So worked in a couple of colleges and a university, but then I went to work for the Arkansas Department of Education, and my job was to write curriculum around the technology and to train teachers. And so I was a curriculum developer and then a teacher trainer. And then as I moved up through our government system of education, I ended up becoming what was called the curriculum design coach for the Arkansas Virtual High School. So in Arkansas, we had a law that every student had to have one online course before they graduated. And I actually oversaw the team of teachers. There were about 120 teachers that were in charge of writing the curriculum. And when they got to me, they had never taught an online course. And so I had to train them and teach them and oversee them. And so, yes, I was very parallel. I was a leader in the primary education side of things, but an actual teacher in higher education.
What a fascinating job. That sounds so much fun. Because training is a tough one sometimes. And it's got a lot of, you've got to be really on your game, right? all the teachers watching, you don't tolerate anything that's not amazing, which you shouldn't.
That's right.
And I
That's right.
commend you for that.
Because you guys
You
know.
exactly. I'm terrible. I go to a workshop and I'm just critiquing it the whole time. I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, just stop. Anyway, back to this whole idea of the leader and where you've landed now. And it sounds like you kind of got there quite quickly in your career as well, into this leadership role. So what's the difference? We all have our ways of explaining it through our own experience, right? So how do you define the difference between a leader in L&D and somebody who may be working within a team on sort of, I'd say, more on the tools? Yeah. Talk about those kind of two roles, and when did you realize you were doing the leadership thing?
If you know anything about Bianca's story, she talks about how she wasn't really able to give herself a title. But I relate to that because I was the same way when I transitioned out of the higher education classroom into leadership. I remember, I think my first title was learning specialist, but when I go back and look at what I was doing, I was a full practitioner. I was writing curriculum. I was designing, I was an instructional designer. I was designing trainings that were being led in person and online. And then I was a trainer because I was also leading a lot of those trainings. Yeah. So it was really interesting that I was doing all of those things. And I think not really knowing exactly what my title was supposed to be was so helpful because it never crossed my mind like, that's not my job. Like that never was part of my vocabulary.
Check out this very popular video where Bianca explains how she sees the difference between an instructional designer and a learning designer.
Now, as a leader, I'm going to say now, I do believe in boundaries, and you need to set boundaries. I probably stayed up too many nights working too late when I should have asked for help. But what came from that time is I learned so much about all the different roles there are in learning and development. You can be a specialist, you can be a technology specialist, you can be a designer, you can be a developer, you can be someone who just does the analysis, you can be someone who just handles the evaluations. So learning and development is such a big industry. People don't realize how many jobs there are to be done. The problem that I ran into is that I didn't have those boundaries in place and I didn't know enough about it yet, that I said yes to everything to the point of where I got really close to burning out. You may think as teachers, because we come from environments where we have very limited resources. So sometimes if you want a training to happen in your school, you become the expert and you lead that training because there's no other resource that's going to do that, right? When you carry that idea into more corporate, nonprofit learning and development, that actually can become a barrier. And that's what I did to myself.
To hear from Bianca about what barriers she has typically seen for teachers, check out this video.
So Bianca says that I moved up into leadership quickly, and I kind of did, but it could have been quicker had I done a better job at setting parameters. So when you're a practitioner and when you're not starting to practice those leadership skills of knowing when to say no, knowing when to ask for help, understanding how the work is being distributed, when you're not paying attention to that, you find yourself with just, an overwhelmingly amount of work. And it's like you can't even see the bigger vision because you're in that day-to-day grind. Learning and design projects, when you're designing, they take hours and hours and hours. When you're developing, like if you're using tools like Storyline or Captivate, you're spending days and weeks in those tools. It is wonderful work. I find it almost meditative at times. Like I love technology, I do, but you just get caught up in it. And that's why practitioners are assigned to only 1 or 2 projects at a time. There's just not enough time to look at the bigger vision. Like you have to stay really focused on those details. And that's your superpower at that level.
Yeah. That's a way of explaining it, because it is I say it's like it's that deep work, right? So if you're trying to do multiple things in a day but you need to sit down in that detail, you need to carve 2-3 hours. You can't be interrupted,
That's right.
Anyone who's tried to be a leader and do that Yeah, good luck, right?
Right. Yeah, it just doesn't
You're
work.
interrupted all the time, right? I use it now as a treat. So like on Fridays, if I'm building content or writing scripts, I do it on Fridays because it's my treat day, because no one can call me because I call it Flow Fridays, right? But it's the day where I can do deep work because I can't get into practitioner mindset during the week at all.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I wasn't sure if we were going to talk about it, but I love that you call it Flow Fridays. I practice the same thing. It really is like, if you are wanting to move up, practicing what we're talking about, where you just start blocking off a certain time, or even start with blocking off like 2 hours one day a week that you're going to do this one thing, that is going to help you learn so much as a practitioner, but also as a leader in managing your time. Time management is a leadership skill for a reason, but just understanding how you can manage your own time is going to help you so much. But when you are doing the work, I get into the rabbit hole, Bianca, of those studies on how long it takes us to get back to an activity once we've been interrupted. And they've pretty much all agree that it takes about 30 minutes. If you're interrupted from doing design work, it takes about 30 minutes before you can get back into that.
Check out the video, Cracking the Time Management Code for Teachers, where Bianca shares some useful tips.
I absolutely believe that. And that is the worst part of when you start out. I think you don't honor that enough because you think you can multitask, because we've been told we can. And we can't when we're doing design work. You just can't.
No.
And you end up making mistakes and having to redo things. And then you learn really hard lessons because, you've sent it off to publish and you've realized you've been inconsistent in a term way back from module 1. And then you've got to go back and redo, and you've got to go and check everything. And then you feel the pain of that distraction very, very viscerally, I think, when you're working under time pressure.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because that is one of the biggest lessons I learned in how I needed to that is what showed me how I knew it was time for me to take that jump from being the practitioner to being a leader. When I started my company in 2018, which I was still working doing the education stuff, I was trying to manage 2 things. And obviously I had a lot on my plate. I started out really strong, but I would say about 6 months into running my business, I was still acting like a practitioner in my business. And so I would be the one designing the storyboard, and then I would be the one developing it in Storyline or Captivate or whatever we were using. And I would send it out. And I remember clients over time started getting more and more frustrated at the amount of mistakes that they were seeing, words being misspelled. Like especially when we got into the reviewing in the authoring tool part.
Yeah, that's hard.
Okay, so if you're not quite sure what the difference is between a practitioner and a leader, then please press pause and open this video on a new screen to learn all about it.
Yeah, people were like, why didn't we catch this in the storyboard? And after that happened about 3 times, I was like, why aren't we catching this in the storyboard? And that's when I realized that when you're a practitioner, there is such a thing as being too close to your projects. You have to be that when you're designing them, but you can't be the designer and the quality control person.
No, you cannot.
Yeah. I mean, I have not met anybody who can do both very well, but yeah, I think that's when my leadership mindset shifted. And I realized, like, okay, now I've got multiple projects that are coming through the company. My role has to change now. Okay. And so that's where I really saw the evolution of what I was doing. So I started taking on less and less of the design work. And that's where I would bring in team members, and that's how the company grew. And that's how you get employees. Basically, that's it. If you're going to start a business, that's how you get employees, is you realize that you can't do it all and you hire people to help you. But then when I brought in the employees, it was training them to design and develop the way I had, but then also being able to take that step back and be at what we call the 30,000 foot view, be the visionary, to understand, are we hitting the objectives and goals? are we creating engaging learning? Are we solving my clients' problems?
That's key. Yeah.
Yes. Because sometimes you get so caught up in the work, you forget, like, oh, they came to you because they have a problem.
Yeah.
Yes. But then quality control at the end, like, what is it that we're putting out there in the public? What does this look like? And so as a leader, that's when I had an aha moment and realized, like, oh, my day is working in sprints. That's what we call it. But we're working in sprints, like little chunks on a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
So my practitioners are spending hours and days on 1 or 2 projects.
Yeah.
And I'm spending a little bit of time just getting my eyeballs on many projects. Yeah. And I would say that's a big difference.
For more on how to manage an e-learning project, watch this video.
Yeah, it is a big difference. You're sort of guiding the ship and you're kind of checking. I sort of feel like sometimes when I wake up, especially as also running an own business, so you're not only doing the leadership of the L&D, but you're doing for me, it's the leadership of all the marketing and the sales and everything else. So I always think of that Giphy, that Giphy with the cat doing that thing on the keyboard like this. Have you seen that Giphy? I feel like that's me in the mornings, because the first hour and a half is me on like doing that. It's basically just like checking on everything and making sure everybody's cool and doing that, overlooking. And each project, and at the moment I'm kind of playing a pseudo role in a few projects. I'm kind of the project manager, just because of the project falling on a certain date, not having enough team members. So it's that overseeing part that changes. But at the same time, I'm sure you realize this, you kind of miss the deep work sometimes. So do you still get in there and do some of that?
Not all my client work, because my team members, my team that work for me, I realized that I had to, in the South, we say, let go and let God. So I had to let go of the control.
Yeah.
But so many of them were like, my assistant is amazing, but I trained her for a year. And after a year, she finally goes, either you're going to let me do it or I'm not. And I was like, yes, you're right. So I really trained my team, but they're to the point now to where it's almost an insult if I get too involved. So the emerging leaders is my opportunity to kind of go deep and get back into that deep work. We're working on some new courses right now. So I get to scratch that design itch and that development itch by going in and working on that, but also knowing that I can always bring a team member in if I need help there.
Yeah.
If I get pulled away. But yeah, I very much enjoy it. And I think it's important. So again, setting boundaries is a big thing for me, but I think it's important that you do stay in the work as much as you can, setting a boundary so that you don't want to go back to those all-nighters and things. But if you can stay in the work, it helps you relate to your team. Like, I can still have really good conversations with the team on being creative and trying to figure out how we're going to make this one piece very engaging for the learners that we're designing for. So I think it's important to have a foot in that world when you can.
Absolutely. And I think it helps. So one of the things that I need to always use it for, and I'm assuming you would as well, that leadership side, is when you're scoping a project, right? You're trying to solve a problem through the scoping. And if you've been off the tools too long, you sometimes forget the nuances to the bits that you're trying to solve. So what I found recently is, because I have had to come back on the tools a couple of times in more depth than I had for about a year and a half of the business, I really was just CEO. I really couldn't get into the projects. But recently I've kind of jumped back into some projects, and it's given me more material to feed from, because I'm closer to the examples in which I need to be able to help solve the problem. And I think it's wise to jump back in every now and then, even if it's you just pick one that's going on, and you just say to the lead learning designer you've got, look, do you mind if I pay a bit more attention to this one? Because I want to just understand this better, because I need to refresh myself on the processes that you're going through and the tools that you're using, because tools change as well,
Oh, they do. They do. And it's funny you say that, because I still act as primary project manager on a lot of the projects that I work on. And so when we're putting the time out there, putting it together, I typically am like, okay, 1 hour e-learning, we're developing it in Storyline. I'm going to give my designer a week to put that together and send it back to me. Well, I started noticing that we were being asked to do some Rise modules. So I'd send it over to the designer, and 2 days later, they'd get things back to me. And the first time I was like, did they like pull an all-nighter? Like, what's going on? And then I was like, I need to see what Rise is. And then when I got in there, I was like, oh, this is going to save my timeline. Like, this is amazing. Yes. Yeah. Not being familiar with Rise, I did not see how much time it ended up saving. So as a project manager, it was like, oh, we can really save some time here.
Yeah.
In our standard plan by shortening it. But it also helps on the sales side now that I know more about Rise, because sometimes I will have companies come to me and say, we want to do a rapid development project. And when they say that, if you're not familiar, it basically means that they want to break the training up into phase 1 and phase 2. And phase 1 is going to be a shorter, quicker, almost dirtier version, to get it out there to help people. And then that's going to buy us time to spend time creating this really bigger project. Whenever I started learning about rapid development, I was like, Rise is the perfect tool. It's mobile friendly. It's easy to use. So just becoming aware of that has also helped me better scope the projects and sell the projects.
Not familiar with Rise? Well, check out this review Bianca did to learn more about it.
Yeah. Oh, no, I hear you. So we're running out of time, but I just want to leave with one last question. So if you were to give a piece of advice to anybody who has, we knew the cat would appear at some point. Just decided to show her face.
She did not disappoint.
No, she didn't. I knew she would appear. If you were to give one piece of advice to somebody who is a practitioner right now, who really wants to go into leadership, what would you tell them to do as they start to think about that role change?
I think the first piece of advice I would give you is to document everything that you're doing. And yes, that does not sound fun.
Sounds painful for me.
It's not glamorous. But if you want to get into leadership, the first thing that's going to happen when you're a manager, a director, or a supervisor is you are going to be put in charge of people. And when you are put in charge of people, they're either going to have a process on how they do things or they're not. If they do, then there's going to become this battle between whose process is right. And if they don't have a process, they're going to look at you to teach them how.
Yeah, for sure.
How to do it. You are going to be light years ahead. You are going to be light years ahead if you come in already knowing your process. And I'm not saying that that's the one that has to be used, but if you understand how it works and you're able to articulate that to members of your team, that's going to save you months of work.
Totally. And if you can come in to the employer and say, I know how to sort this out, this is how I would do it, that's magic, right?
Absolutely.
If someone came to me and said that, I'd go for it, Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, that's going to save us months of times.
Side note, if you're interviewing right now for jobs in learning and development, check out Bianca's top 5 common questions with some hints and ideal responses.
So 100%.
Because it is a hard thing to productize, right? We can't productize what we do very well. So from a business perspective, we have to just get efficiencies in process. It's the only thing we can win on in the sense is efficiencies of process. And the way in which we, like you said earlier, train and onboard our clients to us is part of that efficiency. And so
that's right.
Somebody comes to you and says, oh, here's my standard subject matter expert information pack that I use to train my academics on how to work with a learning designer. I'd be like, please come in, right? Whatever you've got that solves that problem and that helps that process become streamlined and make sure that no information is forgotten in the onboarding and everybody's on the same team, you just go for it.
Right. Yeah. Well, I do want to follow up with that answer that I gave. Sometimes I get pushback from people, and I actually had a really great LinkedIn post about this last week, but we had some really good conversations. Sometimes I get pushback and people go, oh, you're so task management oriented. You're so focused on the process. Like, what about the people? And my argument is, if you are wanting to get into leadership right now while you are not leading others, figure out your process so that you can give 100% of yourself to your team and be people focused when you do get that job. That's why I always start with the process. Sometimes you have to figure out your process and lead your team at the same time. But if you get that opportunity to get the process down before you're managing your people, you're going to save yourself just so much time and heartache.
Amazing. Yes, I agree. Well, Rachel, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us and joining me. I say us, but us is in the audience and me. And I look forward to more and more conversations as we go, and collaborations, and seeing the community grow that you've built. It's fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bianca.
And until next time, stay awesome.